What attracted you so much in the desert floor?
Well, I was attracted to everything that comes into view when you look closely at something. I wasn't interested in looking into the horizon, or I wasn't interested in the horizon line. I wasn't interested in looking out or beyond. I really just wanted to be in one place. There's a book that I've talked about in the show in some of the explanations called Desert Notes by Barry Lopez, and it's a collection of stories and essays, and I took that with me on this trip to the Nevada desert, and reading that, and it wasn't the same desert, it didn't necessarily relate directly to where I was. I wanted to respond to some of his writing in some way, and I took a lot of those lines directly, like what you see in the video. One of his sort of actions is take the bits of rock, put the bits of rock back together to form a stone, dig down, the earth is moist. And another one was about being with the desert. I appeared to be smelling my hands cupped full of rocks. So those three I took and wanted to work with those directly. So that's sort of where the video came from, absolutely, and then the drawings and the photographs sort of came from that as well.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question.
Could you point out one of your pieces? I'm not sure who's painting what. So.
Oh, absolutely. Hester, do you want to do that for all of them, or
just?
Actually, that's not a bad idea. And while you do that, I'm going to turn on your video.
Okay. Okay, I'll start with mine. So the video, which Hester's about to turn on, these drawings on photographs and cyanotype prints that are framed around. So on the back wall there's four, that frame with 4 images in it. And then also these paper and photo collage pieces back here, and here the small pieces, and then the spikes, the desert spikes that are pink here.
Thank you.
That is my work.
So Nancy, could you point out what your work is?
My work is the ones that are the squares. They're all the bigger squares, 2 feet by 2 feet. Same format in all of them. And I will say, to refer to that, that's probably, did you want to ask me something specific, or should I just take off on that?
And why did you pick square?
Oh, I kind of love squares.
Yeah.
And
it's in very an unusual shape.
For a landscape. Oh, is it?
I think so.
Yeah, I suppose so.
The golden whatever section is definitely rectangular.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I don't know. I don't like the rectangle so much. I have you have your thing, and I feel like as you get older and you're trying to find the focus in your work when your work can be anything. You're trying to hone down to what is it you really care about. And I go, I like the format of a square. And in this work, after this previous work I did, I had this vision that I wanted to have something with just a central image right down the center. And I'm calling this my system, in that all these are somewhat strongly composed the same way. There's variation in that, but they're all, eliminate a lot of variability, and define some parameters, and then within those parameters explore the color and the iconography. And the iconography, as I've stated around in these paintings, is from my personal collection of my own photographs that are formally and personally meaningful and associative. And so I kind of set myself out And these saying I'm going to have this square format, I'm going to draw a horizon line down the middle, and I am going to, I pull out my collection and I go, are these still meaningful to me? And I go through this whole pile, and truthfully I try not to think too much, and I look at what resonates, and what resonates is I start making a pile, and then I revisit it at different times, and I try really not to think really, not to use my frontal lobe, but to use some part of something deeper in there that just connects to what resonates for some reason, and try not to think about it too much. And that's part of my challenge of don't overthink it, just see what is trying to emerge. And it's kind of my...
So your work is outside of the field that you put the horizon in. It's here hyper-realistic, and I assume fairly labor-intensive. Is that right?
Medium, because the person...
How do you deal with not thinking when there's a lot of time involved?
Well, part of it is I found with these, and where my work schedule is, I'll have a time where I lay these out and make a lot of decisions ahead of time, so that once I get into them, it's a lot of production. And like Rebecca, I didn't say in the beginning, but I believe people like to make things. I like to work with my hands. I like to get lost in it. When I was young, I used to say I love art because it makes me forget I'm going to die. But meaning you can get so lost in kind of a calm, soothing place. And, I've gotten so I crave that flow and calm and comfort in the production stage. And actually in the deciding and arranging stage. And you get your project, or at least my painting, I get it 2/3 done, meaning I have the images in the middle, and then I turn on the make a lot of formal decisions, and sometimes I know exactly what I want there, and other times it's a struggle to figure it out, and I'm trying to do less. I'm trying to do as little as possible to get it done. Because, I can throw the kitchen sink at it, but I'm trying to have it be less and more succinct.
But you make the decision of...
There's a lot of craftsmanship in them.
Yes.
Yes.
For instance, this piece, when I look at this, I thought, oh my gosh, having to do those red stripes after you're almost done. Well, it seems just terrifying.
It's funny. I have a couple systems, but that's kind of what I'm trying to show, is that that I have the boldness to do these fine little paintings, and if I ruin it, if I draw that line on there and I don't like it, there's not a lot of ways to repair it. So. Yeah, it is a little bit of a kind of risk-taking, though. I do have these really great pencils that are watercolor pencils, so I can draw it on there first and double-check. I kind of like it. I try not to do stupid things or things that really ruin things on purpose. Try to be a little cautious, because I can just jump off the cliff. And, but, right, that's part of what I'm showing you there is that was a risk.
So, Rebecca...
she's got a question.
Well, in your process, and it seems like in your personal relationship to the work and the execution of the work, there's a lot of contrast. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be worked with and produces a kind of tension that makes the work, I think, more powerful.
Oh, thank you.
Say that?
Yeah. No, I there's a lot of contrast in there of focus, not focus, defined, not defined, and hopefully of some different types of marks, even between like that netting at the top. That's really not made in a dimensional way. I could make it dimensional if I wanted to, but just the flatness. Yeah, and how it fits in there, and I'm sorry I'm taking too long here. In that one picture that you used with the clouds in the background. For a while I was doing these, meaning you were doing it in the PR part, or it was in the newspaper. I really liked that painting, but where I tried to make the landscape more dimensional with, with some clouds and make clouds dimensional, and that's when I said, I don't need that. As much as I kind of like it, I'm trying to, I don't think that's necessary to still create the space.
Here's another question.
When you did printmaking, were you into etchings?
Yes, and lithography.
So I can see the relation to the etching, the emphasis to the surface was important to you, texture. Okay.
Yeah, etching first and maybe.
Rebecca, I think your work is diametrically different. As in, if you mentioned you work with a palette knife, and your surface is very much worked. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so I think, first of all, I start off, somebody asked me at the opening, how do you start these pieces? And, you start with a white canvas, which is always sort of horrifying. And it's like, where to start? And I just slap paint on. Again, it's very unconscious. I turn off that sort of, decision-making part of my brain and just make something happen. And then it's a process of elimination. Some of that paint and that underpainting comes through, and some of it gets covered up. But there's a lot of push-pull. So it isn't, unlike Nancy's work that has sort of, a very deliberate layer that goes down, that's very flat, and there isn't a lot of room to push it or change it or pull it in a different direction. My work is all about that, where it really is push-pull. It's really a reaction of what that ground is doing, and what those objects, their relationship and their edges, and how that, again, it's a physical working that I, really strive for. And oftentimes I live with these pieces for a while, and I go back 2 or 3 times and we'll shift a shape. A lot of times it's scale, like there's just something that isn't quite right. I think that the piece, the broken wing piece, was one of those pieces where there was a shape that was much larger, and it was, I just lived with it for a couple of weeks. It was like, there's something wrong here. And it's a lot of times it's gut, it's just, what is it? And it was just a shift of scale. And so a lot of times it's about a relationship, those shapes, and it's also a narrative. So I'm sort of dealing with kind of a story in my head, an idea of what these things mean to me, and then do they work, in a relationship within that picture plane.
So here are 2 very different approaches. A planner and I don't know how you call that, but I think it's very interesting that you have similar objects, but a very different path to get to it. So, Jill, how is your work way going? How do you? I mentioned this before, I think, and otherwise I'll do it again. The video that we have on the stage there is really the core of this body of work that we see, that we look at. Is that correct?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. And so how have you worked on the other pieces? How is that level of intuitivity that both these artists are talking about compared with? Now, how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the video, is definitely documenting an action. the photographing of the ground was also kind of the same sort of documentation. And then I brought the work back, so back to my studio, and I just sort of started playing with shapes. And a lot of what's on the wall is what kind of I've been calling the shapes of the desert, and so I was playing with the shapes of the rock, and then the color that I noticed in the ground, which was very pink, and so pink became a big theme, and shape became a theme, and there were some sort of light and dark, which we always think of when we think of the desert, but I really wanted to focus on this idea of shapes of the desert and working with rocks. So yeah, it just sort of became, well, where can I take this, and one action will lead to another idea, which will lead to something else, and it sort of ended with taking the rock and drawing these circular shapes on paper, which is the small works that you see. So I feel like that's how I work a lot, where I'll start with a very specific action, a very specific idea, and then it just sort of goes in different directions.
So you use the word action quite a bit. So are you a performance artist that ended up in a landscape I don't think that these qualifications are that important. In the end, all the three of you are just artists, and you've all mastered different media. So I don't think it's that important, but it's kind of interesting. Are you? How did
No, performance is always a part of the work, and it often starts with doing something somewhere. And the Barry Lopez writings gave very specific directions of things to do. So in that way, I was documenting performance in a space. And there have been other works that start in very much the same way, with either an interaction of some kind, or using photography to document an idea or something, but it's not necessarily a photograph, it's the idea and the action that was the starting point of that work. So yes, I think this definitely was a performance in the desert. Yeah.
So the exhibition committee and myself obviously found it appropriate to set all three of you, in a show that we call a landscape show. How do you feel about that yourselves? Does anybody want to say something about that?
I heard you earlier say that you don't consider yourself landscape.
I don't think any of you consider yourself as a landscape painter, for sure.
Right.
Well, it's pretty limiting in a way.
I think when you proposed the idea, I sort of thought about, landscape. So I had to define it and then work backwards. I'm not a landscape is not my focus, but there is a narrative within what I call an internal landscape, and that's really where the connection to landscape. It isn't about going out in the landscape and documenting it, but sort of internalizing the idea of what does landscape mean. It's a sensory, for me, it's sort of a sensory way of moving through nature. And so some of that certainly is internalized, but it's also, there's another layer, there's many layers to what I do. And so that was, because I felt like I had to have a connection somehow to the idea of landscape, and then sort of deny it. or rethink it, or have it something other than what we all think of as landscape.
Nancy, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah. I'm an art teacher, so I talk about landscape and horizon line quite a bit with my students. And do I think of myself as a landscape artist? Well, it's not as foreign probably as it was for you. I don't think of it as landscape per se, but I know when you put a horizon line, you immediately create a sense of space. And as human beings, we are used to where the sky meets the ground because that's part of our existence. And as modern human beings living in the homes or buildings and structures, it's where the wall meets the floor. So it's really, our view is bisected by a horizontal line or a horizon line often. So I just think of it as giving it kind of a space.
And Jill, I think you felt a connection as well, because we talked about landscape with your previous example. Right?
Yeah, we have talked about landscape before, and I do think my work a lot of it is about a way of looking at landscape, and not necessarily landscape in the traditional sense of landscape art, but I forget where I was going with this, but one of my favorite artists is Richard Long, and a lot of my favorite artists work with landscape. Richard Long is considered a landscape artist, I think, or he kind of sometimes is in environmental art and sometimes in landscape, but a lot of his work is centered around walking in landscape. And one of his most famous, and one of my favorite, is A Line Made by Walking, and he did a number of different lines, but he would walk landscape. A line made by walking is walking back and forth until he made a line with his walking. So I think again it's about the artist in landscape, or the artist in place. I think is my connection to landscape.
Mm-hmm. Rebecca, do you think it is important for artists to try and push? Because these are all views on landscape, but do you think it is important to look at things in a new way? I mean, landscapes are pretty and beautiful, and we can lose ourselves in it. Why mess with a good thing?
So is it the job of an artist to...
Not so necessarily. Do you think it is important as an artist? I don't think I want to go and tell you what to do. Or tell you what an artist's job is.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe. But is it important? Is it important for you to think about your subject matter? So let's talk about your subject matter and what to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that. Thinking the content of the work is sort of where I always start. You know, I have to have some idea of what this work is about. Am I on the right track? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah.
And I think there is always this push, because you have to. I mean, I personally would I'd get really bored if I wasn't pushing the boundaries of what I've done before. That's what propels you forward, and that's what makes the work interesting. There's also something about creating something out of nothing. You can't recreate the same thing over and over again. I mean, you can to a certain degree if you're discovering something new each time. But for me personally, that's what keeps me in the studio every day. Is just that discovery. What am I going to discover today? And that sense of you go in with an idea and you finish a piece and go, how did I arrive here? And there's something there's this process that you really don't have complete control over. It's just the process of doing. And you end up in these places that are really kind of like, wow, okay, that's interesting, and it propels you on to the next piece.
So in your work, we see certain shapes come up again and again. Why do you like doing that? You must like it.
It's to define it and redefine it and define it again. Like, have I really gotten to the crux of what that is? And there's also this, they're symbols, they're not, so you'll notice the titles sometimes are about bees, or they'll be about a club shape, or they'll be a bird wing. Those just become symbols of which I am working out the story in my head. And, yeah.
When you mentioned that your background was sculpture, and you wanted to do sculpture, when I looked at your painting, I could see it. Yes, it's a landscape of sculptures. The shapes. Yeah, I saw that in the
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've worked in any three-dimensional forms. Yeah, it's showing me. Yeah. So those are just, images that I stay with, because I'm still trying to get to the sort of the essence of what they mean, what they're about, and the relationship of which those things play within that picture plane.
So Nancy, there's a question.
I'm just wondering, have you been influenced by any particular artist? Your art looks familiar, but I mean, it looks like some artists that I've seen before, or maybe a group of artists.
Well, that's the question you were going to ask, is what piece would you want? If you could possess any piece. There's lots of folks I look at. Twombly is one. Giorgio Morandi is another person that I have an affinity to. Jim Dine, David Korn, Jenny Gray is somebody locally, a Eugene artist. She used to live. Jenny Gray? Yeah.
She has exhibited here.
Yeah.
Greenwood and down. It's mostly abstract.
Well, that one over there just kind of reminds me of a Paul Klee painting, circa 1920 or 30.
I could see that. Certainly that is somebody I have visited many times, but I wouldn't say currently is right in my head. But there's just, and it changes. You have certain people that you're really attached to, and then you move on and you, see other things in other work. And there's a lot of folks online that I look at, and a lot of it is sort of that sort of pushing paint and manipulating the surface and creating a lot of different layers.
I wanted to ask Nancy, I think I hope that I remember the question. So you sort of created this framework for yourself, in maybe comparatively to what Rebecca has. She has these shapes that she works on. So how does that evolve for you? Because I do think there's some evolving.
On this particular series.
Yeah, and then maybe in the bigger scheme of your body.
Well, part of it is, and I think I said this at the last talk, an artist is somebody who's got a question that only they care about, but not meaning it's something that they're willing to be kind of obsessively dig into, to follow it farther than the normal person would want to follow it. And so I started this series with these these are photos I've had for a long time that I've always found intriguing. And I wanted to see if I could use them in these landscape shapes, those 1, 2, 3 over there. But I know in the progression of these, what I'm trying to do is, be a little simpler. So these might be more complex. They have more little pieces that create, either define the foreground or define what's behind things, and kind of try to define a landscape. And part of it's what can you get away with and still kind of makes sense, but doesn't really literally make sense, but is within enough of the conventions of how we look at art that it's readable in some way and not completely out of any context that anybody can connect to. Does that make a little bit of sense? And that's a hard question for me in my experience. But anyway, so where my more recent ones are like that one over there with the green lower part, and the one back over here where they're starting to change shape, and that's what I think my next step is. And the wonderful thing about doing this or doing anything that a person pursues is that you can't get to the next step without going to that intermediate step, because it's that experience that lets you go to, okay, my next question on this. So that's where I see myself going, is really learning more and trying to develop more of, and that one, it's a figure of some kind. They're gone from a panel, almost like a foreground panel, plinth kind of thing, to they're starting to take a shape on their own. And truthfully, I don't know how that's going to turn out. Meaning, I don't know where it's going, but that's where I'm going with it, and what they'll evolve to. But I still think I'm going to keep this landscape format, and part of it is also I'm really trying to expand my color palette, and I have some ways of trying to push myself, so I just continue to learn and grow.
So, Jill, how do you go from project to project? The previous show, Jill's in the Corinne Woodman Gallery, was about traveling up and down the coast and experiencing and photographing the sky and the weather.
The same viewpoint, yeah.
From the same. And this body of work is really looking at a very close landscape, and the videos are the most obvious things, but then you also have the series of drawings and the spikes that are very much outside of that. So how did you arrive from the action, the performance, and the videos to these more ephemeral looking, fragile things?
Well, I think part of it has to do with being there in the place versus being in the studio. I think that makes a big difference. When I was there, I was taking paper out onto the rocks and then my camera, and like I said, I was just working on the desert floor. And then I came home and I brought some rocks with me, I brought spikes with me. And so then I think it does become, I don't know if abstract is the right word, or more poetic, or what, but there is a change that definitely happened, but it's still the same. It's still the same rocks, and it's still some of the same paper and the same shapes, and using with these pieces, using the same photographs of that desert floor. I think a lot of it is studio versus the being there, and then it is kind of, again, taking an idea that already is, it is an ephemeral idea, this, dig down, the earth is moist. Put the rocks back together to form a stone. So I think it's just translating that into what else, what what else it could be, other iterations of that.
So your one body of work can be very different to your next body of work.
Okay, so yeah, So yeah, going back to the photos of, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think.
Not for you, obviously.
I know. I'm like, why isn't this very clear? I think for those photos of the coast came after a series of drawings that were more like a daily practice sort of thing, where I was looking out my window when I lived on the coast. Like, I had a view of the ocean. I was drawing just it was actually a square, like a window, an attempt to capture something very vast in one frame, which is very hard to do, whether it's ocean, forest, sky, desert. So I think that was part of the idea that I had doing those drawings, and then again the same view of the coast on different days, different hours, different seasons, how that view changes. So again, I think it's attempting to capture something at different times. Yeah, it has to do with where we are, what we're doing.
I have to explain to the people that are here that Jill gave instructions on how she wanted to hang the drawings, so the multiple pieces, meaning a little bit away from the wall, not in the frame, but not how to position them. So how they're positioned now is really the exhibition committee and myself, who knows this case, how to present it. So that is not something that Jill directed. And having been around them for a while and having heard Jill talk about them a little bit, I probably would hang them slightly different now. I think they form that a little bit less, but those two look really as two pieces. And having been with them for a while and having heard Jill talk about them for a while, I probably would hang them with a little bit more individuality. So I'm telling you this as to show you how presentation or influences the communication that has been set up by one person and then rolls on to other people and how you look at it. So that none of this is very absolute, I think.
Right, and I think a lot of what I do is the process of doing it is almost more important than
Right, and that's why you say, well, I want them a little bit further away from the wall, but how you do the rest is not my concern. I've done it. Yeah, here's a question.
I see they're all framed very similarly. If you each if you frame them yourself, would you frame them or have bigger frames, little frames? I'm just curious.
Who's else?
Well, whoever, because maybe Jill. Because yours aren't framed, or some of yours.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're happy with the frames, or would you, if you had a single or a one-person show, would you use this kind of frames?
Yes.
Okay. Case closed.
So I wanted to ask the artist and the audience if there is a question that hasn't come up yet that you would really like to address. Yes, Ron.
Like speak about where you go from here, and you're going desert. I don't know if you're going to stay in desert format. Is it going to be urban? Is it going to be like the coast again? You talked about the coast. Small, large, performance, more video.
Well, right now I really do like this this sort of parameter of, or not parameter, but the shapes of things. So I am going to continue with some of these shapes that I find really interesting. And it won't necessarily reference back to desert or this specific landscape, but I am interested in some of these shapes. And one of the first projects that I did that maybe was in landscape was, I was in Kansas, and that's where my grandmother is from. But I went looking, because she would always tell me stories about the tall prairie grass of Kansas. So I went looking for the tall prairie grass, and that was sort of the project today. I went looking for the tall prairie grasses. I think about this area too, and I really am interested in the oak savannas and finding unplowed bottomland that is left in this area that hasn't been turned to agriculture. So I don't know, but it's in my mind of going in search of the unplowed bottomland the way I did with the tall prairie grass.
Does any of you, oh, yeah.
So, if you don't mind me asking you a question based on a conversation we had earlier, you said to me, and I think you said somewhere else, that it's all metaphor in paintings. Would you be willing to just pick one and talk about the metaphor in there?
I don't know if I can pick one.
Or
I can take
one of your symbols.
The storage of the broken wing really came out of this dream that I had as a child. It was a Superman dream. Superman was this, very much part of my childhood. And every Saturday morning, my brother would turn on the TV and we would sit in front of it. And so I had these consecutive dreams about Superman coming into our house, and I was never sure if he was there to steal from us or he was there to save us. And so, I don't know how I came about that, but I distinctly remember it now as an adult having this dream. And so, how do you get at that image? It's such a powerful thing, and it's so powerful to a child to have this icon on the television screen that, faster than speeding light or speeding bullet. I can't remember how it went, but it was. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? And so I sort of thought, I can get at this image, and it becomes bird. And so those bird forms really transform themselves into getting at this dream that I had as a child. The house shape really became, I did a series of, I took a workshop and I brought all these images. It was an acoustic workshop, and brought all these images of silos, and I really liked the idea of silo being a thing that you store grain in, and so that's where the storage came from, and you store these memories. For me, that was really the symbol of storing memories. The bee images really, I have had a pretty complex relationship with my mother, and she was a pretty powerful force in our family, and so she really became the queen bee. And so I sort of work at, and my son, he's so funny because he'll come into my studio and he says, "Not another bee, please. Can we get over the bee, please?" And so I kind of joke about that, but that's sort of a piece of what that's about. One question?
One more question, Jill. You talked in the beginning of background in social sciences, and you said that you could ask the same questions of art that you asked of those. And I was wondering, could you give us an example of that?
Sure. What I meant was that you can ask some of the same questions using art as a site of asking those questions. And it's when you are an artist or when you are working with a creative medium, I guess it's the failure of what you're asking or what you're doing. It's okay, whereas the stakes are much higher in an academic discipline for failure or for being wrong, maybe too. But I think nothing so specific as a research question necessarily, but working with text, so working with Barry Lopez, and there have been other authors that I've attempted to use their writing to somehow not just respond to it, but to kind of give a visual essay about that work in some way. The Barry Lopez being one of the most recent. But then also there have been projects I've done. There was one I did with a group, actually the same group that I worked with in the desert, where we were the Johnny Appleseed color guard, and we started in Indianapolis, which is where Johnny Appleseed ended up in his bringing apples westward. So we were part of a parade in Indianapolis where we, instead of going east to west, we went west to east, and we handed out native seeds, native seedlings. So I think sort of on this border of social science and activism maybe are some of the things that I've been interested in the past. But again, where you can experiment more, you can fail more, you can be wrong more, your ideas can be nonsensical, there are a lot of artists that do very high stakes projects too, but yeah.
My last question. If money and space is not an issue, what artwork would you like to own?
Well, this is a really hard question.
It is.
And I've been thinking about it all week. It's like saying, what's
That's
your...
why I'm giving you...
I know, and I appreciated that. Because it's like saying, what's your favorite color? I'm like, depends on the situation. Probably never purple, though, for me. But anyway, I was thinking this Tristram, I used to think his name was Tristan, but I did look it up today. Tristram Hillier, who's a cubist, or surrealist from England, is someone who's really influential to me. I've always loved his work. It's really empty landscapes that are kind of at crossroads, and also his has a famous painting that's called something like Variation on the Form of an Anchor, which is this whole odd, almost like pumice-like sculptural black thing on a beach, and I just love this painting and have for many years. Then I'll say one more thing. I would love that. Plus, I want a big painting in my house. That's pretty big.
But it doesn't matter.
But I want it big. If I was going to live, there's other artists I really like. I go, that's too small. I want it way bigger. And the other one, Martin Ramirez, who's an outsider artist, who's very, very obsessive in lines, and he does these little ballpoint pen drawings on just refuse paper that he finds. He's an interesting story, but they're big and long and just obsessive parallel lines and trains and tunnels and things like that.
All right.
I'm drawn more to small works. I love works on paper, and I love drawings. I love artists that do drawing that are maybe sculptors or some other, known for another thing, and I love their drawings. So Louise Bourgeois is one of my favorites, and I would not want one of her sculptures, but I love her drawings. And in the early 2000s, she went back to drawing, and there are, I don't know how many of her drawings. She did a series called the Insomnia series, and I would love any of those drawings. They're very simple, I love one of her definitions of drawings is that drawings are thought feathers, which really speaks to the way I approach drawing too. So Louise Bourgeois, and then Nancy Spiro is another artist that is also just very prolific in her numbers of, and her shows, the number of things that she puts together. Any one of her prints I would love.
So 2 artists are in big 2 pieces.
I know it's a hard
It's very hard.
And we're not even that hard.
And it's not absolute either.
This was a tough question because I sort of thought, I live in small places and I think that I have to live with the art in a really intimate way, so I couldn't have a piece that was too big. Well, I wouldn't fit in my house, but I guess that doesn't matter because we could have any space we want. But I think I have to look at art in a way that that has an intimate response for me. There were 2 pieces, I guess. I'll go with 2. One was an artist named Judy Cook, and she's from Portland. And I saw this piece in a friend of my husband's, her collection, and I was just mesmerized. There was just something about it that just, and I don't even know what exactly, but it just took me and captivated me, and I couldn't stop looking at it. And she was showing us all this artwork throughout her house, and I kept coming back to, fine, this is really all really, and she had a wonderful collection. It was like, fine, but let me go back to this piece. The other would be, there was a wonderful retrospect of Rick Bartow's at the George Simpson Museum a year ago. He's since passed away. And there was a piece that it was called The Wave. It was a really simple piece, but it had such incredible power, which most of his work does. And it was really the power of nature. These 2 figures in a very simply defined boat, and this huge wave behind them. And it just struck me as, I mean, there's so much about his work that I love, but there was something about the power of nature and the frailness of humanity that really spoke to me.
Well, lovely choices. Thank you so much for being artists, for making artwork. Please keep doing it, for giving your time and thoughts and consideration here. I think I speak for the audience that it is very much appreciated. Visual artists don't necessarily like to talk. Not necessarily, some do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.